Hey everyone, Scott Barrett here to talk about some of my favorite DFS tournament plays for Week 3. At the quarterback position, we have Patrick Mahomes. Again, he's my #1 ranked quarterback this week. Unfortunately, he's also the highest priced quarterback on FanDuel. He's the second highest priced quarterback on DraftKings. But he's still actually kind of cheap on DraftKings. You know, pricing's really cheap this week. It's also really tight, so it's easy to move from one guy to the next, and then you're staring at Mahomes. So he's $7,000 on DraftKings. Typically, the highest priced quarterback on DraftKings over the past 2 years is over $7,700, so that kind of looks like $700 in savings. And not only is he the #1 quarterback in my rankings, but he's the #1 quarterback by a wide margin. So through the first 2 weeks of the season, he's on a historic pace. He has 67.2 fantasy points. Not only is that the second most this season, but it's the second most all time. That's right, only Ryan Fitzpatrick this season ranks higher. He's playing on Monday night, so he's not on the main slate, so we don't have to worry about him. He's also performing really well. He's graded out top 4 in each of his 3 career starts, dating back to Week 17. This is the 6th best start ever by a quarterback during the PFF era by grading. Some other quarterbacks you want to look at. If Leonard Fournette is out this week, I absolutely love Blake Bortles, especially on FanDuel. He has some glaring splits. When Leonard Fournette is not in the lineup, he performs much better. I also like Cam Newton. He's a little more on the expensive side, but I do like him quite a bit this week, as well as Carson Wentz on FanDuel. There's a lot, to criticize there, a lot to worry about maybe his first game back, but I see more good than bad, and he's really cheap on FanDuel. But moving over to the running back position, my top running back on FanDuel right now is Giovanni Bernard. He's only $6,400. Joe Mixon's out. He played on 50% of the snaps, Joe Mixon that is. But still, Giovanni Bernard saw 6 carries, 7 targets. And last year, when Mixon was out, he played only 6 snaps between weeks 14 and 16. Guess what? Bernard averaged 16 carries per game, 5.7 targets per game, 20.7 fantasy points per game. He played on 86% of the snaps. Yes, rookie Mark Walton was drafted in the 4th round, but guess what? He's played 0 snaps thus far. I will move off of him if I do hear conflicting reports, maybe beat writers saying he's not locked into a bell cow workload. Mark Walton will see some touches, but right now I do really like him a lot. After that, Melvin Gordon and Alvin Kamara are in absolute smash spots, and I want to get at least one, ideally both, on like all of my lineups. Alvin Kamara, arguably the greatest receiving running back in the NFL, and well, he gets to face off against the Atlanta Falcons, who we talked about last week. They have given up the most receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs by a wide margin over the past 2 seasons. That trend continued last week with Christian McCaffrey, Melvin Gordon against the Los Angeles Rams. They have 3 top 20 graded cornerbacks. Really ferocious pass defense that should funnel targets to running backs and tight ends. Although Antonio Gates isn't looking too good, and he's popped up on the injury report this week. So really, I just see a ton of work for Melvin Gordon. That's what we've seen thus far. He's one of the top-ranking players in expected fantasy points, a ton of targets. Jalen Rashard, we saw what he did in Week 1. I'm predicting a similar game, like him a lot. Kareem Hunt, unavoidably cheap on DraftKings. I also like him as a leverage play on lineups where I don't have Patrick Mahomes and Latavius Murray. If Dalvin Cook does not play this week, I'm locking him into a ton of my lineups against the Buffalo Bills. Last year, they gave up the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. This year, already second most. A lot to like with him. Wide receiver, however, just give you 5 names. The running back position. Wide receiver is a lot tougher. Julio Jones, historically underpriced. He's up against Marshawn Lattimore, one of our top-rated cornerbacks last year. Struggled in Week 1, much better in Week 2, though it was against some lesser competition, but historically underpriced on DraftKings by about $700 compared to his average of the prior 2 seasons. FanDuel, cheap as well. Again, shadow coverage against Marshawn Lattimore, that's tough, but I think my top value play is Allen Robinson on DraftKings. He ranks 9th in targets. He ranks 9th in target market share. And guess what? We don't have to worry about Patrick Peterson anymore. Yes, he's one of the best cornerbacks in the league, but no, he does not shadow anymore. That means Robinson's going to run at least 2/3 of his routes against Jamar Taylor and Budda Baker. Both of them right now ranked bottom 12 among 79 qualifying cornerbacks in yards allowed per route and coverage. Moving on to the tight end position, I really like Zach Ertz. Here's a cool stat. Over his last 10 healthy games with Carson Wentz under center, he averages 19.4 fantasy points per game. Healthy games, what did I mean by that? Just he didn't leave early with an injury. So 19.4. Not only is that the most among all tight ends over the span by a wide margin, but it would actually have ranked 3rd among all wide receivers last year. He's priced like a high-end tight end, which is still well above the elite wide receivers, but you might be getting elite wide receiver production from him. Again, 19.4 fantasy points per game. But that was with Alshon Jeffrey in the lineup for the far majority of these games. He's not there anymore. Volume might be even better. And I don't think I'm overthinking this, but this is super interesting to me. Mike Wallace is out. They bring in Jordan Matthews, a guy who's run almost 99% of his career routes from the slot. What is that going to do? That's going to bump Nelson Aguilar outside, and he greatly struggled outside in the beginning of his career. So last year, he's fantastic, one of our highest graded wide receivers, ranked highly in yards per route run, wide receiver rating. His first 2 years of his career, he was our single worst graded wide receiver. That's over 100 qualifying wide receivers. What changed? He moved him back to the slot last year. It was his natural position in college. So if he moves out wide, and we have this large sample of him struggling out wide, then what does that mean? Hopefully, ideally, more work for Zach Ertz as the tight end. Really like that play. If you want to go cheap, I do like Austin Hooper on DraftKings. I don't love him for any other reason than he's just so cheap. 3 catches, 30 yards, a touchdown. That's 4x value right there. But I think that's all we have for you today. Check back next week to hear who I like for week 4. Thanks for tuning in, and for more fantasy goodness, check us out at profootballfocus.com.